All right, okay. Yeah, so again, I believe prejudices are real, but race is not. Race is just a fucking artificial concept. Okay. A new division of the earth according to the different species or races of men who inhabit it, sent by a famous traveler to Mons, nearly in these terms. It's blocked out because he used an expletive there. Geographers up to this time have only divided the earth according to its different countries or regions. The remarks which I made uh, upon men during all my long and numerous travels have given me the quote unquote idea of dividing it a different way. Although in exterior form of their bodies, and especially in their faces, most men are almost all different one from the other according to the different districts of the earth which they inhabit, so that those who have been great travelers are often never mistaken in distinguishing each nation in that way. Still, I have remarked that there are 4 or 5 species or races of men, in particular, whose difference is so remarkable that it may be properly made use of as a foundation for a new division of the earth. I comprehend under the first species France, Spain, England, Denmark, Sweden, Germany, Poland, and generally all Europe except a part of Muscovy. To this may be added a small part of Africa, that is, from the kingdoms of Fez, Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli up till the Nile, and also a good part of Asia as the empire of. Do you see how freaking ridiculous this is? He just starts listing a bunch of. He says there's 5 different races, basically, or species, right? Blah, 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 blah. So he does under the second species, third species, the fourth species, the Lapps, and the Americans. As to the Americans, they're in truth most of them olive-colored and have their faces modeled in a different way from ours. Still, I do not find the difference sufficiently great to make them a peculiar species different from ours. Blah 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 blah. The remarks I have made also on the beauty of women are not less peculiar. It is certain that beautiful and ugly ones are found everywhere. I have some very handsome ones in Egypt who recalled to my memory the beautiful and famous Cleopatra. I have seen some very handsome ones among the blacks of Africa who had not those thick lips and that squab nose. 7 or 8 of them whom I met in different places were of a beauty so surprising that in my opinion they eclipsed the Venus of the Farnese Palace at Rome. Blah blah blah. I have also seen very handsome women in the Indies. Blah blah blah. Okay. So Immanuel Kant even picks this up, okay? Alright, so here's what he says. We have identified 4 human races. We can understand all the diversity of this genus on the basis of these 4 races. However, all deviations require a lineal root genus. This is Kant, okay? We must either conclude that this lineal root genus is already extinct or that we can find evidence of it among the existing stock from which we can generally construct a comparative account of the lineal root genus. To be sure, we cannot hope now to find anywhere in the world an unchanged example of the original human form. However, it is only because of this natural propensity to take on the characteristics of any natural setting over many successive generations that the human form must now everywhere be subject to local modifications. The only part of the earth that we can justifiably think to have the most fortunate combination of influences of both the cold and hot regions is the area between 31 and 52 degrees latitude in the Old World, which also seems to deserve the name Old World because of the peoples that inhabit it. The greatest riches of the earth's creation are found in this region, and this is also where human beings must diverge least from their original form, since the human beings living in this region were already well prepared to be transplanted into every other region of the earth. We certainly find this region white, indeed brunette inhabitants. We want, therefore, to assume that this form is that of the lineal root genus. The nearest northern deviation to develop from this origin form appears to be the noble blonde form. This form is characterized by its tender white skin, reddish hair, and pale blue eyes. This form inhabited the northern regions of Germany, and if we believe other available evidence, the region that stretches further to the east up to the Altai Mountains, a cold region filled with the vast wooded areas. At this time, the influence of cold and humid air which drew the bodily juices toward a tendency for scurvy, produced a certain stock of human beings. This stock would have gotten on well enough to persist as a race if the further development of this deviation had not been so frequently interrupted by interbreeding with alien stocks. We can therefore at least take all of this as a tentative account of the origin of the real races. If so, the four presently existing races and the natural causes that account for their origins can be illustrated by means of the following summary. Lineal root genus, white of brownish color. First race, the noble blonde, northern Europe from humid cold. The second race, copper red, America from dry cold. Third race, black, Senegambia from humid heat. Fourth race, olive yellow, Asian Indians from dry heat. What are your thoughts? This is Immanuel Kant. This happens 200 years
This
before
sounds
Nazi Germany.
ridiculous.
What's that?
Wait. Asia's dry heat and Africa is humid heat?
Yeah.
What?
This is
Wait, I
Immanuel
thought
Kant.
the two continents. I thought the other way around, and also the two continents are bigger than that. So are we talking? So like for example, Mongolia is dry, and like China is like humid. India, like the more south you go in India, the more humid it is. What the flip is he smoking?
That's that's how I mean like when it comes to the concept of race, right?
He,
And we're not talking about
dude,
epistemology, like go ahead.
he only went to Egypt and then he only went to Mongolia.
Oh no,
Like
Kant
the
actually never left his town in his whole life.
oh okay.
That's the irony of
Oh flip,
this.
I have to go.
Yeah.
Wow.
He never
I'll be
left his
back.
little town. So, in many ways, like, so, the reason why we started off with Francois Bernier, because he's, like, literally the first one who establishes this way of trying to classify races, right? And just to, like, revisit, what he says, again, is he wants to, okay, he says, the remarks which I've made upon men during all my long and numerous travels have given me the idea of dividing it a different way than just using geography or countries or regions. He wants to study the substantial human form, and that's what Kant picks up later, okay? And then we can get to Blumenbach, but Blumenbach is really not that. I'll just read a little bit so you guys get the idea. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, another German philosopher. 5 principal varieties of mankind, 1 species. So, Francois Bernier is the first one that tries to come up with like the 5 different categories of race. And then it goes through Kant, and then Blumenbach tries to do the same thing. Innumerable varieties of mankind run into one another by insensible degrees. We now have completed a universal survey of the genuine varieties of mankind, and as on the one hand we have not found a single one which does not, as is shown in the last section but one, even among other warm-blooded animals, especially the domestic ones, very plainly and in a very remarkable way, take place as it were under our eyes and deduce its origin from manifest causes of degeneration. So on the other hand no variety exists, whether of color, countenance, or stature, so singular as not to be connected with the others of the same kind by such an imperceptible transition, that it is very clear that they are all related or only differ from each other in degree. 5 principal varieties of mankind may be reckoned. As, however, even among these arbitrary kinds of divisions, one is said to be better and preferable to another. After a long and attentive consideration, all mankind, as far as it is at present known to us, seems to be as if it may be best, according to natural truth, be divided into the 5 following varieties, which may be designated and distinguished from each other by the names Caucasian, Mongolian, Ethiopian, American, and Malay. I have allotted the first place to the Caucasian, for the reasons given below, which make me esteem it the primeval one. This diverges in both directions into 2. most remote and very different from each other on the one side, namely into Ethiopian, and the other into Mongolian. The remaining two occupy the intermediate positions because between that primeval one and these two extreme varieties, that is the American between the Caucasian and Mongolian, and the Malay between the same Caucasian and Ethiopian. And then he just goes into like all the ways that he distinguishes them. Conclusion. Thus too, there is with this that insensible transition by which, as we saw, the other varieties also run together, and which compared with that was discussed in the earlier sections of the book, about the causes and ways of degeneration, and the analogous phenomenon of degeneration in the other domestic animals, brings us to that conclusion which seems to flow spontaneously from physiological principles applied by the aid of critical zoology to the natural history of mankind, which is that no doubt can any longer remain, but that we are with great probability right in referring all and singular as many varieties of man as are at present known to one and the same species. So according to Friedrich Blumenbach, the reason we have, according to him, not just the one Caucasian and first primeval race is because just like in for most animal kingdoms where you start to see diversities, and this is before natural selection, right? This is before Charles Darwin, right? He's saying that it's because the other races degenerated from the primeval race of white man. Like, this is how deep the fucking rabbit hole goes, just so you guys know. And then we'll get to freaking even Hegel. Let me try to. Okay. This is from Hegel now. Okay. Negroes have. Oh, hold on. Okay. Now, in the Caucasian race, this angle is almost or entirely a right angle. This applies particularly to the Italian, Georgian, and Circassian physiognomy. In this race, the skull is spherical on top, the forehead gently arched, the cheekbones pushed back, the front teeth in both jaws perpendicular, the skin white with red cheeks, and the hair long and soft. The characteristic of the Mongol race is revealed in the prominence of the cheekbones, in the eyes which are not round but narrow slit, in the compressed nose, in the yellow color of the skin, and in the short stiff black hair. Negroes have narrower skulls than Mongols and Caucasians. Their foreheads are arched but bulging. Their jawbones are prominent with the teeth and the teeth slope. Their lower jaw juts well out. Their skin is more or less black. Their hair is woolly and black. The Malayan and American Indian races are less sharply distinguished in their physical formation than the races just described. The skin of the Malays is brown and that of the American Indian copper-colored. The mental and spiritual characteristics of these races are as follows. Negroes are to be regarded as a race of children who remain immersed in their state of uninterested naivete. They are sold and let themselves be sold without any reflection on the rights or wrongs of the matter. The higher which they feel they do not hold so fast to is only a fugitive thought. This higher they transfer to the first stone they come across, thus making it their flesh. They throw this fetish away as if it fails to help them. Good-natured and harmless when at peace, they can become suddenly enraged and then commit the most frightful cruelties. They cannot be denied a capacity for education. Not only have they here and there adopted Christianity with the greatest gratitude and spoken movingly of freedom they have acquired through Christianity after a long spiritual servitude, but in Haiti they have formed a state on Christian principles, but they do not show an inherent striving for culture. In their native country the most shocking despotism prevails. There they do not attain the feeling of human personality. Their mentality is quite dormant, remaining sunk within itself and making no progress, and thus corresponding to the compact, uh, differenceless mass of the African continent. The Mongols, on the other hand, rise above this childish naivete. They reveal as their characteristic feature a restless mobility which comes to no fixed result and impels them to spread like monstrous locust swarms over the other countries, and then sink back again into the thoughtless indifference and dull inertia which preceded this outburst. Similarly, the Mongols display in themselves an acute contrast between the sublime and monstrous on the one hand, and the most trivial, pettiest pedantry on the other. Their religion already contains the conception of a universal which they venerate as God, but they cannot yet endure this God as invisible. He is present in human shape, or at least announces himself through some human being or other. This occurs with the Tibetans, where often a child is chosen to be the present, visible God, and when such a God dies, the monks seek another one among the people, but all this succession of gods enjoys the profoundest veneration. The essential feature of this religion reaches as far as India, where the Hindus likewise regard a human being, the Brahman, as God, and the withdrawal of the human spirit into its indeterminate universality is held to be divine, to be the immediate identity with God. In the Asiatic race, therefore, mind is already beginning to awake, to separate itself from the life of nature, but this separation is not yet clear-cut, not yet absolute. Mind does not yet grasp itself in its absolute freedom, does not as yet know itself as a concrete universal which is for itself, has not yet been made its notion into an object for itself in the form of thought. For this reason, it still exists as an immediate individual, a form which contradicts the nature of mind. God does indeed become objective, but not in the form of absolutely free thought, but in that of an immediately existent finite mind or spirit. With this is connected the worship of the dead, for in these the life of nature has perished, the remembrance of them holds fast only to the universal manifested in them, and rises therefore above the individuality of the manifestation. But the universal is always, on the one hand, held fast only as quite the abstract universal, and on the other hand is perceived only in an out, contingent, immediate existence. It is in the Caucasian race that mind first attains to absolute unity with itself. Here, for the first time, mind enters into complete opposition to the life of nature, apprehends itself in the absolute self-dependence, rests itself free from the fluctuation between one extreme and the other, achieves self-determination, self-development, and in doing so creates world history. The Mongols, as we have already mentioned, are characterized by an impetuosity which impels them outwards beyond their borders, but it dies away as quickly as it came, acts not constructively but only destructively, and produces no advance in world history. This advance is first brought out by the Caucasian race. I mean, dude, it seems like there's a lot of resentment for the freaking Genghis Khan, dude.
Who would
That
have guessed?
that's Hegel. And then in Arthur Gabineau, okay, he was the godfather of eugenics. So, for almost from 1600 to about 1800, okay, so for almost 2 years, Europe had this idea of this lineal genus, right? Like, first, an arbitrary classification system of 5 different human races where you could just like group people up around the world into 5 general species of humans from one genus, okay, of what it means to be human. And Kant is saying that he's going to say that the Caucasian category of species is going to be the lineal form based on geography or latitude and longitude and temperature. Basically, white people, by which you have the whole diversity of races as they migrate away from the most moderate climate or temperature. So Kant is going to say, well, there's some scientific reason why basically white people is the more lineal genus that we can assume, we can deduce through the temperature differences. Then we get to Arthur Gabineau, who is one of the grandfathers of eugenics. I'm just going to read quick 2 sections. The word degenerate, when applied to a people, means, as it ought to mean, that the people has no longer the same intrinsic value as it had before because it has no longer the same blood in its veins, continual adulterations having gradually affected the quality of that blood. In other words, though the nation bears the name given by its founders, the name no longer connotes of the same race. In fact, the man of a decadent time, the degenerate man, properly so called, is a different being from the racial point of view from the heroes of the great ages. I agree that he still keeps something of their essence, but the more he degenerates, the more attenuated does this something become. The heterogeneous elements that henceforth prevail in him give him quite a different nationality, a very original one no doubt, but such originality is not to be envied. He is only a very distant kinsman of those he still calls his ancestors. He and his civilization with him will certainly die on the day when the primordial race unit is so broken up and swamped by the influx of foreign elements that its effective qualities have no longer a sufficient freedom of action. It will not, of course, absolutely disappear, but it will in practice be so beaten will be so beaten races no will be so beaten down and enfeebled that its power will be felt less and less as time goes on. It is at this point that all the results of degeneration will appear, and the process may be considered complete. If I manage to prove this proposition, I shall have given a meaning to the word degeneration by showing how the essential quality of a nation gradually alters. I shift the same responsibility for its decadence, which thus becomes, in a way, less shameful, for it weighs no longer on the sons, but on the nephews, then on the cousins, then on the collaterals more or less removed. And when I have shown by examples that great peoples at the moment of their death have only a very small insignificant share in the blood of their founders, into whose inheritance they come, I shall thereby have explained clearly enough how it is possible for civilizations to fall. The reason being that they are no longer in the same hands. At the same time, I shall be touching on the problem which is much more dangerous than that which I have tried to solve in the preceding chapters. This problem is, are there serious and ultimate differences of value between human races, and can these differences be estimated? Interesting, right? So like I preface by saying that Gabinaw is a French philosopher. He's considered to be one of the godfathers of eugenics. So his premise or his proposition is that, quote unquote, by the bloodline, right? Each successive generation, through the mixing of blood, becomes more degenerate from its source. I have to mention that again because let me just read the concluding paragraph, okay? He tries to, make his justifications by comparing the different five races, and then he says, I have now given a meaning to the word degeneration, and so have been able to attack the problem of a nation's vitality. I must next proceed to prove what for the sake of clearness I have had to put forward as a mere hypothesis, namely that there are real differences in the relative value of human races. The consequences of proving this will be considerable and cover a wide field. But first, I must lay a foundation of fact and argument capable of holding up such a vast building, and the foundation cannot be too complete. The question with which I have just been dealing was only the gateway of the temple. Starting to get really religious language now, right? The point is that even though the irony here is that Gabinaw is the godfather of eugenics, and he starts his assertion about there being a degeneration of, I guess, masterclass races versus like each subsequent generation, he's wrong scientifically. In fact, what we know now from genetic science is that recessive traits, we can reduce the expression of negative or degenerative recessive traits by mixing blood. So when you actually quote unquote mix across quote unquote racial bloodlines, you actually strengthen the next set of genes. Are you guys still with me?
Yeah, I'm listening.
This is crazy, huh?
Yeah, I know. I'm not a race realist, so yeah.
But this is what happens if you are a race realist.
Yeah.
Like this is like Gabanaw is literally like 100 years before World War II. But this way of thinking was not only codified through chattel slavery, it was also just basically operative, conventionally speaking, across all of Europe.
And who's to blame again for this for this monstrosity?
I mean, uh, the most I don't think the move towards race realism actually happens until Immanuel Kant. Because Immanuel Kant tries to make a scientific case, an analytic case, for how you can take a generalized classification of races, academically speaking. So it's just a virtual distinction. But Kant is the one that tries to move from Mongols, Caucasian, Ethiopians, which is merely just a virtual distinction. And that's fine. I think we could toy with the idea of recognizing at least conceptually, even if we're just making up the distinctions and they're arbitrary in the first place. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that I look like the same as a white person. I'm not going to go all Rachel Dolezal here. But the race realism part doesn't happen until Immanuel Kant tries to give like a scientific classification for it. And then that's when it gets all fucking downhill from there. The irony being Immanuel Kant, in his whole fucking life, he never traveled more than like 5 miles outside of his town. So yeah, I would say that Immanuel Kant is really the race realist. His legalistic philosophy, the type of legalism that we get because of Immanuel Kant, is pretty systematic throughout all European thinking. And they would have been aware of his own biases about how to deal with other races or the diversity of races, universally speaking. Francois Bernier, if I was going to give a soft reading, like since you're asking, like, so then what's the cause of all this? I wouldn't want to put all the blame on Francois Bernier. I think he merely said it was an idea. He says, and I'll read it for the third time. The remarks which I have made upon men during my long and numerous travels have given me the idea of dividing it a different way from just geography, countries, and or regions. We're going to go through Francis Galton, who is a French philosopher. He introduced the term eugenics in 1883 in his Inquiries into Human Faculty and its Development. He had already expressed his views on race in 1869 in Hereditary uh, Genius under the heading Comparative Worth of Different Races. In 1904, or excuse me, his 1904 lecture that follows puts a relatively benign face on eugenics, although the idea of making eugenics a national issue combined with the idea of the fittest races was soon to have major consequences. In a move that was already an indication of what was to follow, eugenics was known in Germany as Rassenhygiene, or race hygiene. Eugenics is the science which deals with all influences that improve the inborn qualities of race, also with those that develop them to the utmost advantage. The improvement of the inborn qualities or stock of some of the human population will alone be discussed here. What is meant by improvement? What by the syllable eu in eugenics, whose English equivalent is good? There is considerable difference between goodness in the several qualities and in that of the character as a whole. The character depends largely on the proportion between qualities whose balance may be much influenced by education. We must therefore leave morals as far as possible out of the discussion, not entangling ourselves with the most hopeless difficulties they raise as to whether a character as a whole is good or bad. Moreover, the goodness or badness of character is not absolute, but relative to the current form of civilization. A fable will best explain what is meant. Let the scene be the zoological gardens in the quiet hours of the night, and suppose that, as in old fables, the animals are able to converse, and that some very wise creature, who had easy access to all the cages, say a philosophic sparrow or a rat, was engaged in collecting the opinions of all sorts of animals with the view of elaborating a system of absolute morality. It is needless to enlarge on the contrariety of ideals between the beasts that prey and those they prey upon, between those of the animals that have to work hard for their food and the sedentary parasites that cling to their bodies and suck their blood and so forth. A large number of suffrages in favor of maternal affection would be obtained, but most species of fish would repudiate it, while among the voices of the birds would be heard the musical protest of a cuckoo. Though no agreement could be reached as to absolute morality, the essentials of eugenics may be easily defined. All creatures would agree that it was better to be healthy than sick, vigorous than weak, well-fitted than ill-fitted for their part in life. In short, that it was better to be good rather than bad specimens of their kind, whatever that kind might be. So with men, there are a vast number of conflicting ideals of alternative characters, of incompatible civilizations, but all are wanted to give fullness and interest to life. Society would be very dull if every man resembled the highly estimable Marcus Aurelius or Adam Bede. The aim of eugenics is to represent each class or sect by its best specimens. That done, to leave them to work out their common civilization in their own way. The aim of eugenics is to bring as many influences as can be reasonably employed to cause the useful classes in the community to contribute more than their proportion to the next generation. The course of procedure that lies within the functions of a learned and active society, such as the sociological may become, would be somewhat as follows. And he lists 5 points, okay? I'm just going to read you the third point. 3. Systematic collection of facts showing the circumstances under which large and thriving families have most frequently originated. In other words, the conditions for eugenics. The names of the thriving families in England have yet to be learnt, and the conditions under which they have arisen. We cannot hope to make such advance in the science of eugenics without without a careful study of facts that are now accessible with difficulty, if at all. The definition of a thriving family, such as will pass muster for the moment at least, is one in which the children have gained distinctly superior positions to those who were their classmates were in early life. Families may be considered large that contain not less than 3 adult male children. It would be no great burden to a society including many members who had eugenics at heart to initiate and to preserve a large collection of such records for the use of statistical students. The committee charged with the task would have to consider very carefully the form of their of their circular and the persons entrusted to distribute it. What? The circular should be simple and as brief as possible, consisting with asking all questions that are likely to be answered truly and which would be important to the inquiry. They should ask, at least in the first instance, only for as much information as could be easily and would be readily supplied by any member of the family appealed to. The point to be ascertained is the status of the two parents at the time of their marriage, whence its more or less eugenic character might have been predicted, if the larger knowledge that we now hope to obtain had then existed. Some account would of course be wanted of their race, profession, and residence, also of their own respective parentages, and of their brothers and sisters. Finally, the reasons would be required why the children deserves to be entitled as a thriving family to distinguish worthy from unworthy success. This manuscript collection might hereafter develop into a golden book of thriving families. The Chinese, whose customs have often much sound sense, make their honors retrospective. We might learn from them to show that respect to the parents of noteworthy children, which the contributors of such valuable assets to the national wealth richly deserve. The act of systematically collecting records of thriving families would have the further advantage of familiarizing the public with the fact that eugenics had at length become a subject of serious scientific study by an energetic society.
So much to digest.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean for it to get all academic. But yeah, if you want to like start thinking about whether race is real or not, you really have to go into like how serious Europe took it. Is any of the shit that they were talking about scientifically, is that real? No, it's not. But that's literally how deep they thought about it. That's how they viewed the rest of the world.
Yeah, even by comparison in itself, let's say like back then colonialization, right? When Portuguese came to eastern part of Indonesia, like they didn't act racist or racial towards the locals over there.
These are German and French thoughts. It's mostly the Germans and the French that became this atheistic.
And then being racist at the same time.
Yeah, like by the time you get to eugenics, they're literally saying we need to stop, we need to take the question of morality out of this. Because he's saying that even if we were to like create this myth or this fable about the different types of animals where some of them are prey and some of them are not prey, they won't be able to agree on how most fairly they should be treated. But what they would all agree on, if it wasn't their moral concerns, was that they all want to live. And they not only want to live, but they want to live well. So he's replacing moral concerns with the eugenic concern, with the sociological concern.
So maybe it is part of the reason why nowadays we have a bunch of atheists.
Yeah.
I see.
Like
Makes sense.
if the Western world gives up on Christianity, we're eventually going to turn into eugenicists. Or the Western world will. Yeah.
Scary at the same time.
Yeah, it is scary.